Welcome everyone to the Co-Creators Global Village as part of World Unity Week. I'm Noelle Marshall, and I'm a co-founder of the Co-Creators Convergence. And that is a Barbara Marx Hubbard legacy group that started in 2013 after the Birth 2012 International event, where Barbara Marx Hubbard said, I'm declaring December 22nd, 2012 as day one of the new humanity. So that's the legacy of our group. And through that process, I met Ruth, Broyde, Sharone. And I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we're going to have view a video, have some Q&A afterwards. And I've been waiting to see this for quite a while. So Ruth, over to you.
Greetings, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. First of all, thank you to World Unity Week. This is their third year of producing a format which allows people from all over the world to share their activities in all the different disciplines and arenas. And you are here today because we want to share information about a very significant movement which has been the breath and air for many of us who are here today, and that is the interfaith movement, bringing together people of diverse religious and cultural beliefs, introducing ourselves, and finding a way to create trust and friendship, and eventually what we're all hoping for is peaceful coexistence. And that is actually, I would say, the motif and the raison d'etre of World Unity Week as well. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share a video, which is pre-recorded, and then we'll have Q&A. And it is called Looking Back, Looking Forward, Grassroots Interfaith. Enjoy the video, and then we'll have Q&A. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the Parliament of the World's Religions, specifically to a workshop titled Grassroots Interfaith, Looking Back, Looking Forward. My name is Paul Chaffee. I call myself an interfaith activist. Retired now, I've spent more than 4 decades championing the idea that the human family needs, even requires, a healthy global interfaith culture. Religion in the world over the past half century has experienced a significant pivot, a shift in the consciousness of humankind. This global development wasn't planned. There's no architect, no complete database. It happened spontaneously. Back then, 50 years ago, most people everywhere knew next to nothing about world religion, about faithful people from other traditions, other races, their customs and beliefs, their ethics, their spirituality. But in the past 50 years, that's all been turned upside down, which is good when we get along and respect each other, and a nightmare when we breed mistrust of the other. 41 years ago, the National Council of Churches commissioned a report on how many local interfaith councils actually exist in the US. They found 8 that had started by 1960, a figure that tripled by 1980, when 24 such councils were included in the study. Most of them focused on interfaith dialogue or social justice issues, or both. These councils tended not to know each other. State to state, city to city, they didn't know each other. Spontaneous. Then in 1988, 250 religious leaders from 12 different traditions gathered together a conference in Wichita, Kansas. It was titled North American Aziza, with leadership from the Temple of Understanding in New York and a handful of activists from across the country. A new kind of relationship was begun. The New York Times called the Aziza the North American Aziza the most important interfaith event since the 1893 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. Aziza gave birth to NAIN, the North American Interfaith Network, an enduring organization where local interfaith activists across the country get together annually to nurture friendship, to share what we do, and to learn from each other. NAIN is a unique kind of organization. No staff, no headquarters, no big budget, just hard-working board members who do the heavy lifting, a purely grassroots effort. Meanwhile, nationally and internationally, the interfaith movement keeps growing leaps and bounds. Entering the 21st century, there were hundreds of local interfaith groups, and internationally now it's thousands, many thousands. A universe of spontaneously developing groups of local people of faith and practice who want to get to know each other better and work together to heal a broken world. Today, we've gathered 4 grassroots interfaith activists who've been doing remarkable work over the past 3 and 4 decades in this effort. In the short amount of time we have, they're going to share some of their stories and what they've learned doing grassroots interfaith work. The Reverend Hung Sher is a wonderful example of how to creatively embody multiple cultures. He grew up a Methodist kid in Columbus, Ohio, went to graduate school to study Chinese, found his spiritual home in Buddhism, and became a leading Buddhist scholar and teacher. He divides his time between Australia and California while teaching on the web to thousands. He chairs the Dharma Realm Buddhist Association and the Buddhist Text Translation Society. Hung Sher is a co-founder of the United Religions Initiative and has been a leading Buddhist activist, interfaith activist for decades. Welcome, Hung Sher.
And hello to all my Parliament friends, brothers and sisters. I began my interfaith journey as a cloistered monk who was not engaged with the world beyond the monastery walls. I came out of a 6-year vow of total silence into the world of interfaith. What a shock. Now, after 47 years as a monastic and a quarter century of interfaith, including participation in 5 parliaments, I recall my first night attending the United Religions Initiative's Global Summit in 1997 at Stanford University. This was URI's opening gala. I was sitting in my dorm room before our opening day, wondering whether I had made a big mistake, whether I might retreat into silent participation for the next week. Then URI founder William Swing, the Episcopal Bishop of California, invited all 250 of us to hold hands in a large circle around our plenary room. He said, "This grassroots interfaith organization, if that's what we're calling it, is not mine. That's why I've stepped back from leadership into the circle, just holding hands as one participant. I'm leaving the center open. If it's going to survive, then it will be due to whatever we create in terms of spiritual and real world value, the eminent and the transcendent energy that comes from our community, from our combined strength and wisdom that fills in the center. That's what will count. It's what we make together that counts." So I heard that and I thought, wow, that accords with the Buddhist principle of no self. So far, so good. I returned to find out more and to learn how to contribute my strength. Later, when members of my own Buddhist community said, "Oh, I don't think I could ever take part," I wouldn't know what to answer when they asked me what Buddhists believe in. I thought of a moment I witnessed in Cape Town in 1999 at Y2K. You remember Y2K? A moment that gave me strength at the very 3rd Parliament ever, when the late Professor Houston Smith brought 30 Native American leaders from various tribes and First Nations to Parliament number 3 for the very first time. At the opening plenary session at the Cape Technicon campus, the MC opened the program by introducing someone he called the voice of Native America, Joanne Shenandoah. out came this striking looking young woman in buckskins carrying a black guitar. She stood in silence for a moment and a tear rolled down her cheek. Before she sang, she said in a voice that filled the hall, "We are now reminded to be aware of our place upon this earth and to fulfill our obligations to ourselves, our families, nations, ancestors, and to the natural world. The words say, we are to awaken. Stand up and be counted, for you are being recognized in the spirit world." Her prophecy song carried the spiritual energy of that session higher and higher. I felt so proud to be part of a North American interfaith community. I asked Joanne later why she cried, and she said, "As I looked out at the thousands of religious leaders and representatives, over 300 different religions, spiritual expressions, and indigenous traditions, this was the first time Native Americans had ever been invited to a place at the table. And perhaps the first time that people had actually met Indians who weren't being chased away by cowboys on a movie screen." But interfaith was still, by and large, something that people did at Thanksgiving prayer breakfasts. It was always a side dish, never the main course. Bishop Swing determined that if the URI was going to sustain itself as a global organization, it needed an innovative structure. So with the help of DHAC, a man who invented the Visa card, a group of 12 individuals on URI's interim global council sat in a room 1 week for a year, challenged to come up with a purpose statement. After a year's labor, we came up with 30 plus words. The URI is a growing global community dedicated to promoting enduring, daily interfaith cooperation, ending religiously motivated violence, and creating cultures of peace, justice, and healing for the earth and for all living beings. That expansive vision gave birth to a movement that now includes 1,080 cooperation circles at work in over 111 countries. That's grassroots interfaith. 10 years later, the folks who came together at Stanford that first time had traveled the world together, following that purpose in interfaith gatherings as large as parliaments in Barcelona and Melbourne, Salt Lake City, and as small as church basement potlucks. Here's an example of how the work of grassroots interfaith spreads by doing and showing. A Silicon Valley entrepreneur was holding a training session in human resources for the 21st century for CEOs. He had chosen Stanford to hold his seminar. He wanted to bring diversity. He wanted to bring his students, these CEOs, up to speed on the potentials for religious diversity in the workplace. He contacted URI, and the office asked 4 Bay Area URI Global Council members to drive down to Palo Alto for the session. Rita Semmel, a retired Jewish newspaper journalist and the chairperson of the Global Council. Father P. Gerard O'Rourke, an Irish Catholic priest from Central Casting. Iftikhar High, everybody's favorite uncle from the United Muslims of India, and myself. We took the stage, sat at a table together, and shared stories and jokes about our decade of pioneering interfaith endeavor. When it came time for Q&A, one of the CEOs said, "Maybe this is the water you all swim in here in San Francisco, but I'm just not used to seeing monks in robes joking with Catholic priests in collars, or Jews and Muslims sharing the stage like old friends. How is this possible?" Father Jerry said, "Well, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have dreamed that I'd be sitting in this chair. And back where I come from in Ireland, is still frowned upon. But I've changed my way of seeing the world. My eyes have been opened. Interfaith has expanded my heart back to its normal size, not the shrunken, narrow exclusivity that dogma forces upon us. I'm never going back. If going back means closing my heart to my Buddhist, Jewish, and Muslim friends. Take a good look," said Father Jerry. "Our planet in the 21st century, if it's going to thrive, will do so because of one word: relationships, relationships, relationships. This is a Kairos moment. Recognize this moment and stand up. The Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad would have been friends. What's wrong with their followers?" he said. You're now going to hear from my fellow panelists, truth seekers, truth speakers, storytellers, visionaries, and pioneers on the front lines of grassroots interfaith.
For 15 years, Aziza Hasan has worked at NewGround, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. She served as executive director since 2014, an experienced trainer, mediator, and conflict transformation practitioner. Her writing has been featured by Yahoo News, MSN, Arabic Radio and Television, the LA Times, among others. She received President Bush's Volunteer Service Award in 2006 and served on the Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships under Barack Obama. She currently sits on Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcia's Interfaith Advisory Council and is a Los Angeles City Civil and Human Rights Commissioner. Welcome, Aziza.
It's such a pleasure to hear both of you and your, it's essentially a recap, done so much important work of like what has already been invested. I got my legs with interfaith work in an organized way in Wichita, Kansas at Interfaith Ministries. And it's the place where I got introduced to NAIN, and I just remember coming across it and feeling like, yes, this is exactly what I want to see and be a part of. And then like, as you were speaking, Reverend Henshure, like, I just feel this awe and this deeper connection. Like it feeds me in ways that connect me back to my own tradition. And so when you talk about letting the self, putting the self away and not having the self, like it reminds me of the teachings in the Quran that say, you put your whims and your desires to the side and you rise to a higher level of goodness when you support people around you. And then it lists all these ways that you do that. And that to me is the power and the essence of people coming together across faith traditions. I was born to a Methodist mom from the Midwest and a Palestinian Muslim dad. And I just remember this incredible childhood, and also going through a point in my life where I started to question a lot, especially people of faith who would say one thing and talk about compassion, but then say another and hurt people in the name of religion and God. And it just created such a strong disconnect for me. And I remember my uncle had spent all his, like, we're Palestinian, but my uncle spent time with UNRWA in Jerusalem, and he would come to Jordan and visit, and he would describe how the ground was so holy, you would feel it reverberating inside you. And so I was like, okay. So we went, my three siblings and I, to Jerusalem in 2005. And I remember walking on that uneven, beautiful stone and thinking, okay, vibrations, let me feel you. Like, where's this holiness? And I felt nothing. Mm-hmm. And it really upset me. And I was like, okay, I still don't feel it. And I remember walking into the Dome of the Rock and putting my hands on the rock and just all of a sudden feeling all this energy and being overcome with emotion. And I started the tears started just falling, and I couldn't explain it. But with time, what I realized was it wasn't that I didn't care and that I couldn't feel anything. It was that I was so angry that I became numb. I was angry because I saw compassion, I saw grace, and I saw goodness. And I also saw a disconnect of people saying that they could commit atrocities in the name of whatever holy entity, and it didn't work for me. And at that point, I realized that I have to be part of my own journey and finding myself, finding who and what nurtures me, and return back to religion that feeds me and what it means to be in the world. And so that's why I work now. It was really hard to leave Wichita, Kansas, to leave Interfaith Ministries, but I made my way to Los Angeles to build community and relationship between Muslims and Jews, because we can build a better tomorrow together. It takes hard work. It takes a lot of attention to really difficult topics, but we can find meaningful discussion in the midst of disagreement and find a way through together. And so that's what we do. We do it in ways where we're building relationship, where we're building muscle around difficult conversations, because that's what it is, a muscle. And when we don't have civil discourse in a way that is respectful and loving, that muscle atrophies. And it's something that we have to be willing to invest in. And then when people go through our programs, they do things in the community, like they work on homelessness. We had our high school students work on something called Youth for Youth around homelessness and like raising awareness, and then also raising funds to help youth be able to choose what they needed in that moment, instead of having people talk down to them. And a number of other initiatives, like during COVID-19, we did blood drives, and just things that make a difference in life, but where we're working together to find and meet the needs of community, and so that we can transform community through the power of relationship. And so I am so grateful to be with you. Thank you for listening.
Wow. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Perri McCary, known around the world as PK, is an artist, storyteller, educator, and social activist who's dedicated her life to cultivating relationships across racial, gender, generational, and cultural aisles. Another co-founder of the United Religions Initiative, she currently sits on URI's Global Council. She's the author of 9 books, starting with the acclaimed Black Bible Chronicles series. Mama PK is a co-founder and director of Think Peace International, a communications media network of artists, educators, and activists bent on building cultures of peace, justice, and healing, particularly for young people. PK lives in Houston, Texas, but considers herself a citizen of the world. Welcome, PK.
This is just an incredible moment. And it's one of those things that I'm glad I don't wear a lot of makeup, because a tear came down my eye. We've just seen 2 generations talk with the 3 of you so far. And so I'd like to say to my family across the globe that the heart knows its family. Interfaith didn't start with me with URI. It actually started with Bill Moyers, who had invited me to be part of a conversations called Genesis. And I'm Christian, and that sounds like, okay, we're going to go back to the past. But what he had put together were people who were from the Islamic, the Jewish, and the Christian faiths to have these conversations in a roundtable discussion. And it opened my eyes, because it was the rest of the story to my own story as a Christian. And so, you know, I realized that I wanted more, but I didn't know what more would be or what it could look like. And then I get this phone call from a Paul Andrews, who is this great musician and musical director that I learned about later. And he invited me to Stanford. And it was the second year, I think, of meeting at Stanford University. They weren't calling it United Religions necessarily. They were talking about interfaith. And in some ways, interfaith for me was a Methodist getting with the Southern Baptist. That was really hard, hard word. And, but now it was more than the Abrahamic faith. I met people who were culturally worlds apart from me, who have now become my family. And I think that is the critical point. I think what Aziza was saying, you know, that the blessing comes in being in those spiritual energy zones. But then there's the anger when we think about what we do to one another. I don't take interfaith for granted. Who we impact in our lives becomes the cornerstone of our humanity. And I think that it's really important to share this part of what interfaith and grassroots interfaith is really all about. Being kind doesn't require coming to a meeting. Do we care? Or do we care only about our little tribes or our little groups? How can we belittle or scorn another because they do something differently? In an imperfect world, we've had to shed light in the darkest corners where it is needed. And for that, I'm so grateful because I've seen it. I will just share with you the one story that I think, as I've thought about this over time and listening to the three of you, there's a young man named Murad, and he was finishing up college. And he met with a mutual friend of ours, John Weiser. And John Weiser said, well, you need to know Miss PK. So the first thing he told me was that he liked rap. And I said, okay, I don't dislike it, but, and he tells me of this rapper who was a Muslim. And when he told me who the rapper was, I said, he's not a Muslim. He said, yes, he is. And it turned out he was. We started communicating across Skype. We had 80,000 messages in less than a year's period of talking and going back and forth. And we had come up with the photo competition called 1000 Kalima. The word, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Kalima means word in Arabic. It's the phonetic sound of word. And we created this photo competition, which grew into, we wanted to find a picture of peace. And I realized there is no one picture of peace that doesn't have another aspect to it. And those aspects are what I think grassroots interfaith is really all about. It's about faith, respect, and service. It's about answering the call when needed. It's about respecting and protecting our earth. It's about dialogues and conversations. It's about our sacred spaces, ceremony, and celebrations. It's about transforming acts of violence and conflict. It's people, places, and cultures. But if you wrap it all up, it's moments of inspiration, poignancy, or epiphanies that show us that we can be on the right road when we become a family.
Thank you so much, PK. That's absolutely wonderful words. Ruth Broyde Sharone is an interfaith author, speaker, and filmmaker, and more recently, the composer of Interfaith, the musical. Ruth co-founded the Southern California Parliament of the World's Religions, serving as its co-chair for 10 years. She produced and directed the award-winning documentary, God and Allah Need to Talk. And she wrote Minefields of Miracles, an award-winning interfaith memoir endorsed by the Dalai Lama. Ruth is a quintessential grassroots interfaith activist, roaming the world to promote interfaith relationships. More than 50 of her stories from these adventures have been published by the Interfaith Observer. Welcome, Ruth.
More than 20 years ago, Marilyn Ferguson wrote a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And I remember reading that book, and she said many brilliant things and many prophetic things. But the one particular comment that I remember to this day, which I would say is the touchstone for the interfaith movement, is that she said, there are people all over the world doing the same work, have the same mission. They are brothers and sisters, but they don't know each other. But there will come a moment in time, a day, when all those people will be connected. And at that moment, we will change the world. And that's, for me, what the interfaith movement has been. Now, personally, I grew up in Chicago in a Jewish family. My mother was a Hebrew school teacher. She kept kosher in the house. My father was much more universal in his approach, and I met many people from different cultures and different countries through him. But I would say the first seeds of interfaith were planted for me when I had just graduated from university as a journalist, and I planned a trip to Latin America to visit the Jewish communities there, and it turned out into be an odyssey of a year and a half. I visited 19 countries and 54 cities, but there was a seminal moment in the trip, which I think I can point back to and say, that's when I decided I would have to do something about the world. I was on a train, third class with the chickens, as they say, in Peru on my way to Bolivia, and a young man came in. He was a seminarian, meaning he was studying in a Catholic seminary, and he was on furlough to go home and visit his family. And the Catholic seminary provided him with everything, not just studies, but home and food and so forth. And he couldn't have been more than about 15 or 16 years old. And we started talking. And at a certain point, he pulled out his food and he opened it up and he offered it to me. And I looked at it and it was white meat. And I thought to myself, I wonder what that is. And I said to him, what is it? And he said, es puerco, it's pork. And I stopped and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't eat it. And he said, no te gusta? Don't you like pork? And I said, my religion forbids me from eating it. Well, that was a new thought to him. And so he said, what religion is that? And I said, I'm Jewish. And he said, oh, and he said this very matter-of-factly, oh, the Jews are the ones who killed God. And I had no words to respond. Well, that incident stayed with me, and I continued to travel around the world. I lived in Italy for 8 months. I lived in Israel for 10 years. I visited Russia. I visited many places. But it was in 1991, I would say I officially became part of the interfaith movement when I had been making a film about Passover, and during that process, I discovered many communities who were not Jewish who were celebrating Passover. Recovering alcoholics, the Catholic Workers Association, abused wives, Seder for the deaf, Seder, women, feminist Seder, and I was so amazed and fascinated. Well, why are all these people who are not Jewish celebrating my holiday, being very proprietary, my holiday? But I came to understand that Passover was a magnetic holiday because of the theme of liberation from oppression, people all over the world from every religion, from every background could identify with it because there's all kinds of oppression. There's physical, psychological, sexual, economic. So here was a holiday that didn't question your belief in God, but said, if you've ever felt oppressed or that you were a slave to something in your life, come join us. And let's find a way for you to increase your possibility of liberation, your potential for liberation. So I created a Seder for 85 people, which at the time, my husband then thought that was ridiculous. But I had felt compelled to do it and I had it filmed. And after that, I started looking for, when I saw it, I thought, well, there are many more stories out here that I haven't heard yet. And as a journalist and storyteller, I thought, I have to tell this through stories. And so I ended up meeting a very beautiful African-American woman who became a minister later, who participated in a Seder for 600 African-Americans. And we became friends, and she came to my house for a Shabbat dinner Friday night. And something revelatory happened that night. Well, that's the only way we can explain it, is that we started talking about what about if we were going to create an interfaith pilgrimage to the Middle East, and we would invite Muslim, Christians, and Jews, and other people as well, but we would try to favor inviting African Americans and Jews to heal the rift that had happened following after the civil rights movement, when the two communities were so close and we wanted to bring them back together. And so that may have been one of the first interfaith pilgrimages to the Holy Land. I don't know, but we did it in 93, 94, and 95. And then I did it again. I organized it in 2000. And each time more and more people came. And so steps of the Exodus from Egypt going through the desert. And then we would come to Jerusalem and we would have a festival of freedom. And we would invite people from all over the world to join us in Jerusalem. And so that was the moment when I understood that it's possible to create events that will bring people together in a new way. And they get to share stories that are parallel but unique. And then they get to see how we are actually, this is the human history, the human story is one with many variations, and we're all in it. And thank God, how fascinating that we've all had such different journeys. So I came back, we came back in the year 2000 was the last time, and then 9/11 happened. And as a filmmaker, my response to it was to make a film called God and Allah Need to Talk, because I saw a billboard in Hollywood that said that, which confounded me and upset me, because I thought, how could people separate God and Allah? They're the same thing. It's just a different way of addressing God. And I made a half-hour film, and when it was premiered in Los Angeles, there was no room, it's standing room only, 250 people turned away, no advertising. And we all realized that this was a moment that, and people didn't want to leave the theater. We had afterwards, we had refreshments and there were 20 different communities represented. People didn't want to leave. It was a safe haven because we knew we had to be speaking to one another, and that was a place we could do it, even if the rest of the world seemed ominous and dangerous. And after that, I became much more involved, and I was one of the co-founders of the Southern California Parliament of the World's Religions. So just fast forward up to today, having been involved in creating and co-creating many activities, interfaith, that use the arts, primarily use the arts. I ended up creating a musical, not ever knowing that this would happen in my life, but I understood that we needed to reach mainstream, and that would be the most direct and exciting way to entice people to the idea of interfaith. And maybe I can talk a little more about that later, but I wanted to end on the note that the arts are the primary vehicle, in my estimation, for us to reach people who have as yet been unmoved. And I believe that when they hear the theme song, something in their heart will stir, because we have more in common than we knew. We have more in common than we knew. I might be different, not quite like you, but we have more in common than we knew.
Thank you, Ruth. That's a wonderful way to end that presentation. Such a rich sharing here. It's, I wish we had 2 hours or 3 hours to unpack the stories but we only have a few minutes, 10 minutes maybe, and I'd be fascinated at your response to each other. PK, you want to start us out?
I'd like to start us out with asking what it is that we really do have in common. And I think that if we can start giving people an idea of what being in common means, we will give people a pretty good idea about what interfaith is. So who would like to start?
Any of you?
Well, the blood that races through us is no different. And what we do have in common, as I mentioned at the very beginning about what Marilyn Ferguson pointed out, is that I think we've all been, someone tapped us on the shoulder. And we may have resisted at the beginning because it seemed mission impossible, but that we do feel, and I see that in everything in Heng Sure, and definitely in Paul, definitely in Aziza, in UPK, and in myself. I don't know whether I had another choice for my life. And that's what I suspect is also makes us immediate family, is that because, I mean, there's no money in it.
But your family sure gets bigger.
Right. But there's this little voice inside that is always moving us towards the light of understanding and of holy collaboration.
In my story, I was asked by my own Buddhist community, what will I say when people ask me to present and say, what do Buddhists believe? And my answer is, and I think we share this in common, is only, let's start that over. When I explain who I am to folks who have no sense of what a Buddhist might be, I understand myself deeper than ever before. I have never gone as deep into my own faith as I have when I've been looking through my eyes at interfaith friends. So interfaith sharing becomes a way to understand myself better. And I said to my friends, just fear doesn't enter into the picture. You're establishing a relationship, and that's where the family comes in.
Aziza, how does that all roll off you?
That's so beautifully said. As you were describing in your response, Hensher, I was thinking about all the many times I've been to services over, whether it was Yom Kippur or Passover, or like, and all these places, like I'm sitting in the services and like, whoa, like there's so much in common, whether it comes to these concepts of forgiveness and how you cleanse yourself, how important fasting is to help cleanse your soul and your heart and help you see and focus on what it means to take care of the earth and the world around you and the hungry person right next to you. And it's fascinating to me because I went to a Mennonite school, Bethel College in North Newton, Kansas. And I remember learning so much more about Jesus and all these incredible stories. And then I'm like, okay, well, what does the Quran say about Jesus? And then like I unearthed so many more stories. And like, this is like such an incredible point of inspiration for me, because then I think of stories about how Jesus and his disciples walked to a town that didn't greet them well, and they were treating Jesus awful in terrible ways. And Jesus still consistently responded with love, always with love. And his disciples were like agitated. And they're like, why? Why are you responding with love all the time? And the prophet's response was, you give what you have, and that you love. And so like, to me, like, that's like what's inspiring. And it's like, there's so much of that overlap, and it comes in all of our traditions.
You know, that really reminds me of a story, Aziza. Back in the day, the interfaith group in San Francisco had been given charge and stewardship of a beautiful chapel at the Presidio, which was called the Interfaith Chapel. And we had a board and gathered for 3 days to figure out what on earth we were meant to do. We didn't really have a clue. And so we decided we'd spend that talking. And on the first day, someone talked about this wonderful sacred land that the Presidio is, that we've been asked to share. And Paul Schultz, a Lakota Indian who was on the board, says, yeah, stolen sacred land. And everyone sort of tittered, you know, just like now. And then the next morning, we were in a meditation period, a devotion period before actually starting. And Iftikhar High, a Pakistani Muslim interfaith leader in San Francisco, Iftikhar came tearing in a few minutes late, and we said, "Hi, Iftikhar, sit down. We're going through our prayer period." He says, "I'm sorry." He says, I can't pray with you till we talk." Roger said, "Well, you know, we're going to talk all day." He says, "I can't pray with you until we talk." So I said, "Well, okay, go for it, man." And he said, "Yesterday, someone talked about stealing sacred land." He says, "You got to understand, I'm a Muslim. And in Islam, the worst thing you can do is to steal something. But you can steal anything except sacred land." What did Paul mean? Well, that's what we talked about for the next 3 days. And we never did any programming at the Interfaith Center at the Presidio which didn't take into account the First Nations, didn't take into account somehow the people who occupied that land in the first place. And it was a rich blessing for us because it gave us so many opportunities that we wouldn't have taken otherwise. And that's what I hear from all of you in terms of that common denominator, PK, that you mentioned.
Well, I want to just add something because Standing Rock was so significant, not just because, first of all, it marked the first time that many of the tribes, the indigenous tribes, got together to talk, but there was an outpouring of solidarity from the interfaith community, and interfaith leaders from all over the country and outside as well came to stand together with the Native Americans. And so here again, this is something that the interfaith community has the ability and the energy and the power to create change in a way that the disparate communities have not been able to do until now. So that story and what happened at Standing Rock are bookends for me.
Yeah. And that morning, here was a Muslim explaining faith to an interfaith group of more Christians than anyone else, what their business is all about, and really shaking us up in the process. PK, I heard you almost saying something just a second ago.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because one of the things that I think is evolving in interfaith are the issues of oppression and racial justice and ending poverty and environmental. I mean, I think that is the beauty of what we do as cooperation circles in my group, but all across the planet, I think we're hearing people who are saying, let's get it right. Let's get justice, which is a bowl of mercy, passion, compassion, forgiveness, love. It has all of that. But in the middle of it is truth. And I think that the truth of our past has to be acknowledged so that we can go forward. And I think that ends up being what is truly being said with this particular presentation.
I wanted to ask Aziza to share with us about the special storytelling events that you've had for young people.
So it's interesting. So Esther Perel and Brene Brown have a recent podcast where they talk about the significance of story. And the learning from that conversation that I took is that when we don't share our story, when we don't share all that truth that you're talking about, PK, and the history of it, there's gaping holes in our healing and in our process, and there's a disconnect that builds. And so at NewGround, we've had these storytelling events where we had a series of 6 storytellers who work really hard to go on a journey of their own story. They share their story with everybody else. They get really vulnerable. And then we invited people to come to say, well, what's the story that's on top of mind for you? And we had people in breakout rooms where they could share their own stories, because if we're really gonna take this seriously and heal and deal with the pain and the injustice right now, and stolen land and oppression, like, we have to be able to name it and to give space for that healing to happen.
Wow, yeah.
Amen.
So touched. Thank you, PK, Aziza, Hanksher, and Paul.
33 years ago, Diana Eck, who's been such a powerful figure in the interfaith movement, she was in Wichita when they began the Assisi, North American Assisi. And what she said in a keynote speech then, how can we live today except together? And how can we live together except with understanding? And we come a long way in 33 years. And by God, we got a big task coming. And I think I can see agreement with all of you that bottom line and personally, it's full of joy. It's full of joy and love. And what a special privilege to have a vocation that lets you hone in on those things. Thank you for attending our workshop. We hope to be in touch with those of you who contact us. And thank you so much for tuning in.
We once lived in harmony, shared a long history. We have more in common than we knew. We we have more in common than we knew. We are Muslim and Hindu, but we have more in common than we knew. We have more in common than we knew. We have more in common than we knew. I may be different, not quite like you, but we have more in common than we knew.
We're going to be raising our hand by clicking on reactions, and it says raise your hand, raise or lower your hand, so I'll know who wants to ask a question. I would first of all just like to say that I was overcome by love for my interfaith colleagues, those who were on the video and those who were not on the video, but who have been doing this work all over the world for so many years. And what's remarkable, as Paul pointed out in his intro, is that this was a movement that didn't have a name and a group of people that didn't know each other at the beginning. They were all operating individually until some catalyst, some oyster that had a grain of sand in it suddenly started to form this enormous pearl that became the interfaith movement, and that today has significant representation all over the world. And just friends, recently, one of my great mentors, Rabbi David Rosen, was one of the first of a group of rabbis invited to Saudi Arabia for the first time in the history of the modern world. So things are happening top down and bottom up, and this was mostly to talk about bottom up grassroots interfaith. And we have a number of people here that I know from different communities, including Lauren Zinn. Are you still here, Lauren? Yes, there she is, who's been doing interfaith for a long time. And so why don't we, who would like to, do I have a hand raised here?
Yes, I see Jasmine Haley.
Jasmine.
Ruth, hi Ruth and everyone. This was so beautiful, and I remember when you first introduced it for the musical, I was just blown away. It was remarkable. I really wish that we could get the children involved, find a way to incorporate either through music or either any way we can get them involved, because they are very like much sponges of interfaith and little interfaith gurus in themselves. So I feel like if we can infuse the same love that we have for interfaith into our children, it'll just snowball into a generation and legacy of interfaith lovers. So I really hope that
Thank you. I would say amen to that. I'm sure everybody here would agree. And you know, there are, maybe not for children, certainly not for infants yet, as far as I know, but there are groups for young people that do exist. One of our former members of the Southern California Parliament, Farah Khan, who is now the mayor of Irvine, she started a group for young people when she had small kids, an interfaith group, and that she was running for many years. And they were getting together and doing activities together and playing games together. And also PK, who you saw on the video, she has been working very, very directly and profoundly with young people as well. And so, but maybe we need to start in utero. And certainly music, you know, you all know, for me, the arts are primo in being able to convey the message in the most direct way to the heart, not just through the head. Lauren.
Piggybacking on what Jasmine's saying about working with youth. I did work with youth for 20 years. I'm still teaching actually, but I was trying to come up with a model that I could teach like the home religion with an interfaith orientation. My home religion was Judaism, so that was like the base, but there was this whole interfaith orientation to it. And I did it very independent of any synagogues. It was my own school for families with interfaith, intermarried parents. And, you know, I was really ostracized. I was shunned by the Jewish leadership in my city. for years. And so it's really interesting because now I happen to mention what I did to the principal of the Hebrew of the day school, the Hillel Day School. And he was like, oh, how wonderful. And I was like, boy, that's a different response than I got 20 years ago. So I think I need to write up that model and get it out there, or maybe even start some kind of like a community of other teachers who want to learn how to adapt that model. And maybe we could have just a teacher training kind of, testing, improving, developing it. So I'd be happy to start something like that if people want. And I'll just say it's laurenzinn@gmail.com. It's really simple. Ruth knows how to reach me. And Paul, I don't know if you remember me. I wrote for the Interfaith Observer a couple of times, and it's good to see you. So, okay, thank you.
Put your name in your email in the chat, please, Lauren, okay?
Okay, all right.
I wanted to mention that Vicki Garlock, Garlock, has devoted the last 10 or 15 years to interfaith dialogue with kids. You can find her at Faith Seeker Kids. She's recently published a huge interfaith curriculum on peace, aimed at kids that are 7 to 11, I believe. She really does the job better than anyone I've run into, and just is an amazing contributor. Dr. Vicki Garlock, Garlock. So look
Paul,
for her. Yes.
Paul, I know Vicki, and I've been in conversation with her recently. She's got 2 books out for young children, one on sacred spaces and one on peace. And they're award-winning, excellent work. And she's starting to work with like a school district administrator in South Carolina, I think, who is very much in favor of religious literacy among teachers in the social studies curriculum. So it's like really nice to see this grassroots movement. So yeah, Vicki, I can help people get in touch with Vicki as well. And then I just also wonder, is there any kind of advocacy or lobbying going on from the top down? Because as super Christian schools start charter schools and get public money to teach their religion, what shouldn't there be some kind of law that says if you're going to get public money to teach your religion, you should teach other religions too? Or if not, at least be required to teach a philosophy class like they do in Europe. So I'm wondering, is there do we have any lobbying at the top down level or advocacy or connections in Washington?
What we do have is that for the first time, or maybe it's the second administration, there have been iftars that during Ramadan that have been held in the White House. And Aziza, who you saw recently in the video, she was invited to the White House recently to participate in the main event. I think the top down that you're speaking of has to do with more the notion of more inclusion, at inviting people. And of course, we have more representatives in Congress who are from other faiths, including, I think, the first Indigenous person that has ever served in Congress. But you're right. I don't think it's just about, I think it's about top down, bottom up simultaneously. It's not either or, it's and, right? I was going to ask, I wanted to just read you something from Heng Sure, because I promised him that I would read, this is to all of you, from Reverend Heng Sure, who you met in the video. He writes, here in the Gold Coast of Queensland, we have an active interfaith, multi-faith group. They're also a URI cooperative circle that is strongly supported among other groups by 2 different Islamic mosques. The Muslim young people in particular are very positive and bright and see interfaith as a way to set down roots in the community based on mutual respect and mutual security through knowing your neighbors and learning their ways. Australia has its rednecks who are scared of anybody who's not WASP, but the light of kindness and goodness radiating from this group just melts away the hostility. Grassroots Interfaith at its finest. Glad you're showing our film, and please give my best to everybody. Peace, shalom, salam, heng shur.
Very nice.
So let's, is there someone else who hasn't spoken who would like to speak? I think we have a few moments. I see-
Yeah, Jit has her hand up, then I have a comment.
Okay.
And we don't have a specific cutoff time, so let
Oh,
the
so we can be here
conversation.
till tomorrow. Fine.
Well, now that's a different story.
Okay, go ahead. Who is next?
Yeah, so Ruth, I don't know if you remember, I met you at Hartford Seminary a few years ago, and then I saw that PK. I'm from Houston, and then there's PK. I was like, oh wow, I got to see this. So, the comment about the top down in charter schools in Texas, kind of the point of charter schools and religious based is that you don't have to do all that you don't have to abide by things. So it maybe on a national level there may be, I don't know, it take it where you can. So this is kind of a comment, if I can say that the idea of grassroots is really and the point of interfaith, those words are really important for me. The thing is, because using the term interreligious, there's a difference, right? And because the religion is that oftentimes for me, I consider that kind of an institutional kind of thing. And a person's faith, for me, I find that my faith journey is it's not stagnant. It's a continuing journey. And so therefore that gives, as someone pointed out, the opportunity of storytelling, telling one's own story or telling about one's own faith. It may not, and therefore it's not the a religious leader. You can have grassroots that's religious leaders, but I think grassroots is also the lay practitioners, but speaking our own truths. And that's the thing about, I love the idea about storytelling, because you can't argue with anyone's own personal story. That's just what that is. And so I was going to make another comment. I can't remember, but I guess
think about it. And while you're thinking about it, I wanted to bring up the entire topic of what is the right name for this movement. So a group of interfaith leaders gathered about 15 years ago in Northern California, and we spent a full day trying to figure out what name we should call this movement. Should it be interspiritual? Should it be interfaith? Should it be interreligious? Should it be, and what does it really mean? And we couldn't come to any conclusions. And I think that the name will morph. I even heard, the latest term I heard is called interbeing. Have you heard about that one yet? Interbeing. So I don't know whether we'll ever have a definitive name, but the name most people revert to when they're discussing what it is we're doing is interfaith. And how does that work with atheists who say that they don't have a faith? Well, they wanted to be part of the discussion and the dialogue. And so they are part of the interfaith movement. And Diana Eck, Professor Diana Eck, who Paul referred to in the video, who started the Pluralism Project, she said that wherever she went, the humanist departments of the universities, or the ethical culturalists, or whatever they were calling themselves, or the atheists, or the free thinkers, they even have multiple names too, right? That they were begging her to be part of the Pluralism Project. And so they created online, just like they had for all the different religions, they created a separate category for free thinkers, atheists, and so forth. And so the naming part, I don't know whether we'll resolve it, and maybe we never need to resolve it. Maybe it's just enough for it to keep changing as we change ourselves. But the truth is that everybody is invited to the table. Paul, you want to say something?
Yeah, in terms of language is always changing. And it's always been confusing to try to, bring to mind the movement we're talking about. There are a lot of folk who don't want to be interfaith, they want to be interspiritual. And there's a long, discussion behind that possibility. I wouldn't worry about it. I think the issues that we've really parse this afternoon about open, about welcoming, about respect. Those elements are not going to go away, whatever language you use. I wanted to go back to another troubling thing. People said, well, is there anything in the hierarchy among people of power? And a matter of fact, if you can find even George Bush, and to say nothing of Mr. Obama, and a lot of other very powerful people have welcomed interfaith activity at the White House, at the Capitol. You know, the statistic that startled me was that 80% of Americans do believe that there is no one way to God. 80%. So why don't we get more press about that? Why don't we see articles about that? Well, you know, if someone runs a 2-minute mile, you know, or goes in and shoots up 50 people, then if it bleeds, it leads. You know, you go and want to hear about it. Did you hear the latest juicy tidbit about that story? You know, but when 80% of us sort of agree that it's hard to make a case that this is important, because people could say that they agree that that there are more ways to God, but then they become Republicans or Democrats or fascists or Trotskyites, or, you know, and then they find themselves at different sides of the table. And that's the unfortunate thing. I think we have to get back to the values that we've touched on here, that PK has said so much eloquently about, and keep up the slow journey. It's not going to be a fast journey. I'm working very hard with Bill Swing and some others on abolishing nuclear weapons. Now, if you go around and talk to people in the street, what about nuclear weapons? Most of them, they say they're terrible. We need to get rid of them. You know, over 100 countries have said we need to get rid of them. But manifesting the power of abolishing them is very, very tough. And people knee-jerk in all sorts of different ways. So we still have a world at threat, especially if you have a madman like Vladimir Putin pushing buttons. All of a sudden, that's a silver lining to the Ukrainian war. All of a sudden, people are paying attention to the fact that nuclear weapons are a possibility, and that they could wipe us all out. I think we've got a lot of what we're looking for, but we don't know how to mobilize it and how to take advantage of it and how to make it express and so on. But don't despair. People keep writing musicals and, you know, all sorts of stuff to keep the discussion going.
Right. I wondered whether there are a few people who haven't spoken, including Thomas Ryan and Waterwoman Kimberly. Would you like to say something? Either of you? Am I putting you on the spot? I guess I am.
Some of you are on mute.
Yeah. Thomas, were you going to say something? You have to unmute yourself, please.
Yes. No, I wasn't, Ruth. Sorry.
Too late. Well, can you tell us something about yourself, where you're from, and what is your connection to this subject?
Yes, well, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, but my ministry over the last 40 years has been both for the work for Christian unity on the one hand, and the work for ecumenical interfaith relations, or as was noted in our dialogue here tonight, whether you want to call it interspiritual, interfaith, but for between the peoples of the different world religions. And I have just been participating in the dialogues regionally and nationally over the last 4 decades, as well as cultivating constructive relationships between members of the different religions in local settings in the different parts of the country. So it's been a very enriching experience for me personally, and it certainly has deepened and strengthened and enriched my own faith experience, as well as my
Thank you.
practice. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there one particular thing that you've noticed in the decades that you've been doing this work that stands out for you? People, would you say there is a greater willingness of people to entertain listening to other people's beliefs?
Mhm. Well, yes, I certainly think that would be a true statement, that there is a growing openness, readiness to listen to one another, to learn from each other, and to cultivate relationship. I very much appreciated just the emphasis on how relationships really are critical and have such a transformative effect for us societally as well as personally in our conversation this evening. I think that was a wonderful point of emphasis.
Thank you. That was from Reverend Heng Shur. Instead of saying location, 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 he said relationships, relationships, relationships. I think that's what you were referring to, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate your being willing to be put on the spot. And Water Woman Kimberly. Hi,
Hello,
welcome.
thank you. It's so exciting to hear you guys talk this beautiful language. So I live in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina near Asheville. And what I do is I have Truth Seeker water festivals. We're having 3 this year, projected to do 6 next year and 9 the following year. And so what that is we are co-creating a resolution. We don't believe in a revolution. That's a low frequency word that causes fight, flight, and freeze, and also causes separation. So we take out the V and we put in an S, and we're choosing to create a resolution, bringing forth solutions for all, especially the waters. So what we love about the water is that water is the unifier for all in all religions. And in all religions, it's beautiful to look at the science why the miracles are around water. And so at our festivals, they're 4-day festivals, building community, where we also teach other people how to do sister satellite water festivals simultaneously. So as we pop up every other month, we're creating an alternative pop-up society where we can come together, share our gifts and talents, find clean water, food, and information, which is frequency, sound, and light. When you harmonize with the water, sound, and light, you then speak to the creator at a cellular level through your waters. So in my presentation, I teach the language of water and how it connects us all. The language of water is a visceral language utilizing light and sound with the creator, and it is a unique song with each of us. So we teach the kids how to sharpen their tools, fill their vessel so they can thrive in these times, and we make sure they have a location to come home to. At our festivals, there are 77 acres with a sacred river running through it, so they can run and play. We also have creation stations, education stations, and relaxation stations, giving them the tools they need when they seek it. We don't teach people a path. We don't teach people a way. What we teach them is self-empowering healing techniques that they can utilize when they're ready. So we just put the tools out on the table, teach them how the tools work, and they find the tools when ready. That way, everyone gets to be on their journey, and we encourage the kids at the Brave Hearts Kids Village to write their own script and be their own hero in their own hero's journey, letting water guide them along the way. So we're looking to do exactly what you're talking about. We're doing it. We're springing up water festivals across the world because we're giving those kids these tools. Our water festival classes are very inexpensive, so these kids can have them in their own backyard, and that anybody can do it at the same time. So big secret, what are we doing? We're pumping the God frequency, 528 hertz, into the man-made matrix. Every time we bless the water, we bless every body of water. This is how we ascend the planet through the waters, and the children are the ones that make it go viral. So
Oh,
we're
wonderful.
really excited to
Beautiful,
co-create with
beautiful.
you.
That is.
We love you
really-
guys.
Can
You
you, do you
work
want to
with
put
WASH?
something in the chat for us of how
Sure.
to reach you? And also, are you presenting during World Unity Week?
Kind of. I'm on the Trello site to
Okay.
speak tomorrow at 3. I'm really challenged technologically, and so I hope I present tomorrow.
There are people, Noel and Bob are here, and they're very, very knowledgeable and helpful in tech.
yeah.
Maybe you could stay after and speak to them and resolve any issues you have. Your topic is so important, and you know, one of the subjects that comes up over and over again when Indigenous people present around the world is again about water. And so it's a multiple ways of calling attention to the environment and to the idea that that is something. What do we have in common? We all have that in common, right? Our
That's
bodies are
right.
primarily water. We need water to survive. So that is an amazing way of drawing attention to collaboration on behalf of everyone,
Yes,
right? No
That's
questions
exact-
asked.
that's
Do you
right.
work with
And,
Do you work with WASH?
um,
WASH, WASH?
no, I'm kind of,
They're a major international nonprofit dedicated to cleaning water, taking care of water, and I would think that you would find a lot of compatriots there. If I were to leave our whole discussion with one word, Ruth, it would be collaboration, the word you just used
Collaboration.
yourself. We can't do this work alone.
No.
You know,
We're not
finally
meant
we have
to.
interfaith work on nuclear weapons, on water, on war, on all these great issues. But
Well,
we're never going to win unless we hold hands. And so the more collaborating I was delighted to hear you're having water festivals all across the country. Let's do it all around the world.
exactly. And that's why what I'm doing is so different. You know, we use the term festival, but we're more than a festival. We are literally creating an alternative society. And we are giving the young people the tools that have taken us all 20 years to gather. I know how to teach these kids this information in 4 days. And so it's not me, by the way. All I do is I show people how to have a conscious communication with water. As soon as people do that, and I can do it within a glass of water usually, by the way. And as soon as people do that with the mountain waters, what happens, that water is so ancient with the wisdom, there's a download that occurs that instantaneously, because water communicates instantaneously throughout all time and space. These kids have a knowing. This happens to everybody. You have a knowing that is eternal, instantly through the waters. And when you become conscious of it, this is how Noah and all those cats lived to like 900 years old. The fountain of youth is real. We have the tools to live this way right now and beyond. And we're the bridge. This water festival, and you know, I'm going to share something. It's being put on my heart to share that I usually don't share, but I think you guys can handle this information. What's happening in the world today, the war is not over land. It's over water, and to be more specific, the consciousness of water. That's why the black goo and certain technologies that are springing up in our food, waters, air is trying to take a certain percentage into a, let's call it, disharmonized frequency in the waters. The great news is this: water is the solution, and water won't allow this to happen, but we must speak to the water as if we are speaking to each other. When we start doing this, the understanding occurs at a cellular level. So I'm here to be very clear, to activate the waters of the light warriors through the waters and the 528 hertz frequency and the light, because it's the light that we get the information that we need for the day. And so as these kids, my Brave Hearts Kids Village it's becoming one of the most strongest ways that the new earth is developing. There's literally 4 programs that are building the new earth simultaneously, and they're all missing one component. That one component is a place for the kids to gather in a safe way. We have homeschooling alternatives so they can exit the matrix and find new ways. We have a game that these kids are building from concept to build, they're about to launch, where they actually are building the new earth problems. They find a problem and they build an avatar in the game as themselves as the hero journey. They fix the problem in the game, they sell it to people in real life, and the kids are making money fixing solutions on earth through a game, programming the metaverse, downloading it with the water frequency. That's very important that we override their frequency with the God frequency. It's very easy to do because the God frequency is more powerful. That's why what you guys are talking about in this collective with the interfaith or whatever the words you are using is so important. All I teach the kids is this: every word is prayer and every prayer is answered. That's why when you talk to water, it happens instantaneously. The miracles happen in the eternity of now through the water. And so when the kids get this, they do it. We all do it naturally. That's what the goosebumps are. That's what the butterflies are. That's what the tinglings are. But when you start doing it consciously, the dimensions and the veils drop within right here. The new earth is here right now. The kids can see it. We got to help them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to just give room to Dean. Is there anything you would like to say?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, Kimberly, I think you stand alone a little bit, but I'm on your side. I've been looking into quantum mechanics recently. It's absolutely fascinating. I hear a lot of talk today. By the way, congratulations. Some of you have been in this movement for decades. And God bless you. I mean, but I think that you've mentioned the White House. You mentioned Obama and Bush, and yet you mentioned top down, but it's not going to work from the top down, in my opinion. It has to start from the bottom up.
Yeah.
There's too much corruption in government. Good heavens, I started realizing that in '63, the early '60s, when they assassinated Kennedy. I've started realizing that now I tend to get too political, so I'm not going to go that direction. But if we don't get political, in that we seek the truth and seek to propagate the truth, we'll never get anywhere. Because right now, half the country believes one way and half the country believes the other way. Well, I guarantee you both sides aren't right. My truth is your truth. Your truth is my truth. And we have to figure out a way to propagate it.
No,
I
Dean,
don't
sorry.
I should say any more today because
I would just like to respond to that for a moment, because I mentioned a little bit earlier how Saudi Arabia invited a group of rabbis to visit them for the very first time in their modern history. And there are other incidents of that are also happening elsewhere. I think that when I say top down, I think I'm talking about on an international level, recognition and invitations and willingness to meet. If that were the, and there's an organization that specializes in that. It's called Religions for Peace, where they have always addressed interfaith more through the people of power and the heads of religions and so forth, and not grassroots. But then you have 2 other organizations, international organizations, URI, you heard about that, United Religious Initiative, which has more than 1,000 cooperative circles, all grassroots, but that's bottom up. And then you have the Parliament of the World's Religions, which originally was just a convener, just bringing people together, but has more and more involved itself in local events and in encouraging grassroots activity. And then you have the King of Jordan, who started World Interfaith Harmony Week, right? And giving out prizes spaces to communities that show the most original creative way of introducing interfaith to their communities. So that was top down. That was a king of a country that felt that it was really important to stress the significance of interfaith engagement. So again, I wanted to, this is from my point of view as someone who's been in the trenches for more than 30 years. It's not either or, it is yes and together. As Paul mentioned too, that it's the collaboration, I call it holy collaboration, what we're seeing now happening. And World Unity Week is a perfect expression of this holy collaboration. We have major organizations that are coming together to create a platform, which last year, there were some 50 million hits of people who attended it. That's revolutionary and revelatory at the same time. But anyway, I'd like to close the session by thanking you each individually. Reverend Lynn, you came in a little bit late. I don't know, is there something you would like to say before we put an end to this wonderful workshop? Are you there with us, Reverend Lynn?
She's muted.
Okay. Yeah. Would you like to speak? If you want to unmute yourself? If you hear me?
I do think we need to close.
Okay. Anyway, I want to thank Noel and Bob, our wonderful shepherds and tech wizards who made this possible. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and joining us in what is we call the cause célèbre, the holy cause of interfaith engagement, one of the most important activities happening on the face of the earth. And we encourage you, if you're not currently active in your interfaith community, even if you're doing work that is parallel to it and bringing people together, such as the Water Initiative that Kimberly has shared with us, find a local interfaith community and get together, collaborate. And the theme of World Unity Week 2022 is coming home together. So let's come home together.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
God bless you.